Hi, my name is Steve Yedlin. I was the cinematographer on Glass Onion, and this is the Go Creative Show.
Hello and welcome to the Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. My name is Ben Consoli, and today we speak with Steve Yedlin, ASC, the director of photography of Glass Onion on Netflix. And if any of you guys listened to Steve's last appearance, when he was on for Knives Out, you know that you are in for some hardcore cinematography geekery. And I am here for it. You are here for it. The conversation is so much fun. You guys are going to absolutely love it. So thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for checking out this episode. Of course, all things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. Now, we have a treat, right? Look at this. I have a gift from our listener, Fabricio Diaz. I have not opened this. I don't know what's inside. He told me he wanted me to film the opening of this package, and I figured what better way to do that than actually do it on the show. So let's see. Let's see what it is. Make sure you guys can see here. I don't know what's in this box. Now, most cinematography podcasts are opening up cameras, lenses, things like that. I'm opening up gifts. We'll see. Hold on. Is this coffee? Look at this. We got a handwritten note. Handwritten. That is hardcore. Cafe Isabel coffee. Look at this. I'm very excited about this because I am a huge coffee drinker. So there is a handwritten note here, and it's quite long, so I'm not going to read the whole thing out to you guys, but I did just read it, and it's very sweet. It's very nice. He's just basically giving his appreciation for the show and giving us coffee, us being Connor and I, our producer, and thanking us both for the work that we do and for incorporating his questions into the show. And really, I want to thank you, Fabrizio. I also got your proper pronunciation, so I apologize for saying it wrong all these years, but I want to thank you for being a member of this community here, the Go Creative Show community. And of course, all of you guys that support the show and ask your questions, whether you send us gifts or not, we really appreciate you as well. So enough of all this yammering on. Let's dive into our conversation with Steve because it's a good one and you guys are going to love it. Steve Yedlin, ASC, the director of photography from Glass Onion. Steve Yedlin, welcome back to the Go Creative Show. We're so happy to have you here. Glass Onion is just such a great film. I finished watching it this morning and it was so much fun. My God, I loved it.
Well, thanks for having me back. I had a blast last time.
What's it like going back to this world, this Knives Out world?
Oh man, it's just so much fun. But I mean, every movie with Ryan, it always just feels like coming home to family. He really just, he really makes everybody feel great. And every movie with Ryan, even from the small ones up to the biggest ones, it always just feels like we're just making movies together like we did when we were 18 and 19 years old.
That collaboration between you guys is so cool. And you hear this story quite a bit every once in a while with cinematographers and directors having these really strong bonds, working together consistently. But there really is something to that. I just feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm curious if you feel the same as I do, that you sort of develop this unspoken language. You can move faster. You can be more efficient because you just know each other so well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Because we're not struggling with any sort of broad strokes or foundational stuff. That stuff's kind of automatic. We're already there. So all the work can be, finesse, I kind of liken it to, well, I also use this analogy when I talk about how prep works with Ryan, but even just in general, it feels like, it's like it really is like a 10th draft instead of a 10th first draft, because, the broad strokes are so sort of unspoken, we can get into the details right away.
Did you have any concerns when you realized that the distribution was going to be going through Netflix and not necessarily like the traditional channels of putting this in the theaters like the first one was? I mean, I know the whole world has changed, but did you have any reservations or concerns about that?
I mean, not especially. And Ryan did, we didn't really know for sure at the time, but Ryan did believe in it, and it, it did come true that there would be a theatrical release to the movie, and there was. So,
It really is the best of both worlds, kind of this new way of doing things. Because if you want to go and see it in a theater, you can. But if you want the convenience of being at home and having it on a service like Netflix that everybody has, it works out so well. I feel like now that this is kind of becoming more and more the norm, it just feels right. Don't you think? I mean, don't you just love having that convenience? I mean, and then you can still go to the theaters. Of course, you have your avatars, you have your big movies that you need to see in the movie theater. And if you want to have that experience with a movie like Glass Onion, you can, but you also have that convenience. It's just great. I love it.
Yeah. Well, I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, I think it's amazing that it's possible. It doesn't always happen, but it's possible to, to have quality, cinema quality at home in terms of, to some extent the size, but the image quality, the color rendering, all of this stuff, and the sound. It's possible to have it at home, but two things. One is just going to the theater. It's just especially on, such a fun movie like Glass Onion, that the experience of seeing it with people, and also just the experience of not getting distracted. You're not looking at your phone or anything. Just watching the movie. But there is the other thing too that's a little disheartening about the streaming. I mean, it's great, and like I have my system all set up, but there's so many hurdles to navigate for the image not to look screwed up these days. We already had all the vibrant and motion smoothing, and the TVs aren't actually calibrated. They're actually amped up out of the box, when they come out of the box, when they absolutely could be. There's no technological reason why it couldn't be great right out, right off the shelf. But it's a marketing reason, which is they want there to be differences between TVs, and if they're all calibrated, there isn't going to be a difference between them, other than the physical differences. And we already had those problems. We haven't even solved them, and now we're piling more on with all of this HDR stuff, which is, really for the most part, as a format, as a signal format, as opposed to a hardware technology, all the HDR stuff is really just another place for things to get screwed up, and not much more than that. So,
Have you had any experience with Apple's calibration app that you can use for the Apple TV? Have you tried that?
No, I haven't used it, because I just calibrate my TV manually myself. So
it really does work well, and I kind of feel like, and maybe other networks are doing this too. I don't know, but Apple TV, that box, not Apple TV the service, but the actual device, offers this calibration tool that I think works really well. I've used it across multiple TVs, and it does bring a consistency to it. But then there's also the other thing too. Like, I can understand why people in your position, people doing large films that are meant to be seen in the theater, have concerns about the calibration issues with people's individual TVs. But when I think about it from an audio standpoint, it's like you hear a song in a studio and it sounds amazing, and then you worry that people are going to hear it on their headphones. But at the same time, people are hearing it on the same systems that they're used to hering things. So it's like, it's the platform that they feel comfortable with. And I feel like people enjoy it regardless, because they're used to their setup.
No, I understand that, but it's still just a little, disheartening that the in the case of, like, if you're comparing a studio, like you're talking about, if you're talking about a studio recording on studio amps, or studio monitoring equipment, compared to somebody listening to it on their headphones, of course, you might be sad that these headphones aren't the same quality, or, whatever the home thing is. One of the things that's frustrating to me about this is what the thing is actually capable of is not the problem. Like, it's actually capable of a lot more. It's really all this stuff about settings and marketing, and things have been made so confused, and it's this marketing stuff at every step in the way that's interposing itself. because you have not only just the one example that I gave earlier of the TV manufacturers amp up the TVs both out of the box and on the showroom so that they look different. Then you have this one-upsmanship where a TV that actually looks correct is going to look dull and dim because one cranks it and the other one cranks it more and the other one cranks it more, and you don't realize that actually. But that's only one of the problems. You have these other problems where like just for example, so-called HDR markets itself as being exactly what the filmmaker intended, except also they demand, when I say they, it is a little bit amorphous. Sometimes it's a mandate, sometimes it's more self-imposed, but there's sort of a demand that the HDR version looks different. But if you can get what you want, if you can get exactly the author's intent out of SDR, then by definition you have to distort it to make it look different on HDR.
Yeah.
And and there's this kind of confusing people to think, into thinking that a style, like a color grading style that shows off the monitor, what the monitor can do differently than another one, is the format, but it's not a format. It's a color grading style, and you don't have to do that style. So anyway, there's all these, I don't know, there's just so many layers of confusion and marketing mumbo jumbo that gets people confused about what they even are looking for, how to even compare things, and anyway.
No, I can appreciate that. It's there were decades of SD, and then HD came around, and ever since HD became the norm, it's been this constant, like, what's next? And it's, obviously it went into 4K. There was a brief stint with 3D that didn't seem to go anywhere, but now we're starting to talk about HDR, like you're talking about. And I'm actually, I don't know much about HDR, and we don't talk about it much on the show, not because we're avoiding it, it just doesn't come up. Yeah. But since we're talking about it now, like in the case of Glass Onion, did you film it? Like, are you filming it in HDR per se in preparation for HDR streaming, or are you filming it in SD and then making alterations after the fact for it to work?
I mean that's a great the way you phrase that question is a great example of the misinformation, because that's like how you're talking about is exactly how sort of the marketing aspect and wants us to talk about it. But the reality is HDR is or so-called HDR versus SDR, which is a bizarre differentiation that I also even think is kind of a false one. But it's it's a format. Like if you compare, like instead of comparing SDR for a second, let's compare two different color spaces. Like a Mac computer uses display P3 color space, and most HD TVs or HD monitors are going to use a color space called Rec 1886, which is colloquially and incorrectly called 709, but whatever. These two color spaces for every single color, except for just a few of the most garish colors, like in a neon sign or something like that, they're capable of reproducing the exact same colors, So when you convert between the two, it should look exactly the same. So the fact that one is, people have been conditioned to misunderstand it and think that if you have a wider color gamut color space, that means everything's going to look different. That's false. If everything looks different, somebody literally just made a mistake. It's like saying, if you convert from feet to meters, that everything's going to get bigger. It's just a different.
That's a great analogy.
It's a different measuring stick. The fact that the unit is bigger doesn't mean that the thing you're measuring is bigger. Both of these things can represent the colors equally. And when we get into HDR as a format, and I'm differentiating these two because obviously having the new higher end hardware is just a benefit. There's no downside of better monitors that can show blacks and get brighter and not milk out and all of that. So I'm talking about it as a format as opposed to just as a hardware, because you can get an HDR compliant monitor or a monitor that's good enough to be called HDR and put an SDR signal in it, and it's going to look fantastic. You can get the blacks, you can get the brightest brights that the TV can make out of it. Um, so so basically, to go to go back to the question, really what we're doing is we're shooting the movie to look exactly how we want to make it look, and we're going to make it look that way in the different delivery formats. And we just treat HDR as another color space, the same way that Display P3 is a color space, Rec 1886 is a color space, and Rec 2100, which is the standard for HDR, is a color space. And we just make the movie, so we don't let we sort of don't buy into that marketing that the fact that you're in a different color space means you have to make the movie look different. We just make it look exactly like what we want, and we do the technically correct mathematical transformations when delivering to the different color spaces so that it looks the same. It's a slightly simplified version of it, but that's basically.
Well, I think it makes sense, and yeah, I mean that is true, because I think you think about it as two different things, but it's really two different. I think the analogy of the color space was great. Well, it's not even an analogy, but it's just using that as a way to get your head around the concept, I think makes sense. And I don't think anyone's explained it like that on the show before. But let's talk about some of the gear choices that you made for Glass Onion, and just to see, maybe there were decisions made because that now, this time around, you're dealing with a lot more people on the back end seeing this film in HDR space. What was the camera package that you chose for Glass Onion, and why?
Well, so we used a Alexa Mini LF and Supreme Prime lenses, and Zeiss Cinema Zoom lenses for the zooms. I mean, it's to me, the camera body and all that is not. I mean, basically, I've spent years building because I have a very custom color pipeline that I've spent years creating, and I can adapt it to any I mean, I need it to be a high-end camera. You can't shoot with a crummy camera. I can adapt it to any camera, but I've already spent all the time for Alexa, so there's not really any reason for me to switch cameras and because it's just going to make a lot of work. It's not that it's not going to come out fine. It's just that it would be a lot of unnecessary work. There's no reason to do it. So basically, we're going to shoot with the Alexa family of cameras. That way I can use the prep on the movie, prepping the movie, not rebuilding my pipeline that's already built and doesn't take any time, any of my prep time in the movie. And then we probably would have used regular Alexa Minis instead of LFs, like we did on Knives Out, except Netflix has some rules about basically they have their own sort of arbitrary definition of what cameras qualified to be sources from which to make a 4K master. That doesn't really, it's basically arbitrary rules. It doesn't really have to do with the actual image quality and which cameras are actually the best sources to make the master. It's more probably legal than it is image science based. But because of that, the regular Alexa Mini doesn't qualify for those rules. So we decided to use LF just to make sure that we can be on our highest streaming tier.
Well, it definitely seems like the innovation is, I mean, cameras are obviously getting better and better and better, but it feels like we've hit a relative threshold with camera image quality where they're all kind of great. Like you can sort of go to any camera manufacturer and get a really fantastic image. And you're seeing trends in people using kind of old vintage lenses and making adjustments and tuning lenses and trying to change the look from the lens side of things versus the camera side of things. Did you in this film kind of make any alterations to your lens kit or special filtration techniques or anything to kind of give it the look that it has?
Well, we did do some lens filtration for some of the day exteriors when we were trying to, modulate just for contrast, though, not to make the lens look crummy. And what you described is very, I know that's a trend these days, and just everybody has different working styles. So, some of my favorite cinematographers are doing exactly what you just described. I don't do that at all. I love using, to me, a lens is something you see when you watch the movie. You see through a lens. You don't see a lens. And if you're distracting people with, I don't know if the style of your movie is coming from what's junky about your lens. To me, that's maybe you need to find some other style, because that's not that just to me, that's just not the most interesting visual. That's not the most interesting thing. And to me, even look, there's all kinds of things that can be absolutely beautiful about, the lens is junky, so the edges are blurry or something like that. But the problem is, or one of the problems is, it'd be incredibly expensive and kind of dumb to just carry a whole bunch of lens sets. We don't do that, and that thing that might be cool in one shot might be bad in another shot. And another thing that these sort of vintage lens looks have is they have flares that go absolutely crazy. And the thing is, we actually love flares. We do a lot of, either intentionally flaring or not avoiding it. And the thing is, every lens in the world is a real lens. It's not a mathematically ideal lens. So even the technically correct lenses, this supposedly technically correct lenses, they still have all kinds of funky flares and stuff. So when you go vintage, it's not having funky flares versus not having them. It's having them go absolutely bonkers versus not. And using lenses that don't go absolutely bonkers actually means we can go bigger with what's actually in the shot. So, we're trying to get our style in what's being photographed rather than out of the lens model. So a lot of times we go, really big with flares, both with Ryan and with other directors I work with too. And and we have scenes where literally a flare is actually lighting this, something that's flaring in the shot upstage is actually lighting the scene. It's not like it looks like it's lighting the scene and something else really is. And, if you use a lens, if you were to use some of these vintage lenses, you might literally just end up with an obliterated shot that you can't even see anything. Because in the past, flares weren't embraced as much, partially because of the quality of the lenses. Now that we embrace them, so in other words, I'd rather go big with what we're doing what we're photographing than go and have the tools for photographing it be able to capture it and do whatever I need it to do. We can, we have good minimum focus with these lenses. Ryan and I both love to do things where things change from far to close. If it's just close, you can put a diopter on, but if it's changing, you want lenses with good minimum focus. I want a lens with a good maximum aperture, so that if we, get into a situation where, there's something beautiful we want to capture in the moment, like a dusk, we can do it, and that the lens doesn't fall apart. Because, again, all lenses if you shoot them wide open, they get a lot worse. So, so sometimes people are, comparing vintage lens versus new lens. The same lens wide open versus the same lens at a different stop is a big difference. And the thing is, with vintage lenses, that's a bigger difference. So they may look really crummy wide open and look exactly like a new lens at a T4. So I'd prefer to not have those two things tied together, where when I want to go wide open, it gets junky, and also the option not to get junky when we shoot close to wide open. So, these lenses, they fall apart less at wide open, and you can also get closer to wide open before they do start to fall apart. And, if you want to look at it that way, that's where we're getting a look out of the lenses. That's what, when we're able to shoot, when we have a bunch of, we do things that's either dusk for dusk or dusk for night, where we're shooting right in that tiny window of dusk, and it lets us go deeper into it. That dusk window is only, depending on which look you want, and also depending on your weather and atmospherics and stuff, that could be anywhere from 7 or 8 to 20 minutes. max. I mean, 20 minutes is probably the max. And, this can get you, compared to not shooting at these kind of stops, this is getting you, potentially doubling the time. It's 20 instead of 10, or 8 instead of 4, or, whatever it is. So
because you have the ability to go up,
open
up a little bit more.
Yeah. When you would be done before, the lights get, because you're shooting it, if you do it, especially if you're doing dusk as opposed to dawn, because at dawn, obviously you're closing down as you go, not opening it up. But, we do dusk a lot more often. On Glass Onion, we actually did some dawn, but we do dusk a lot more often. Usually it's getting better and better and better. The last one you do is the best one. And if you didn't have the stop, you have to stop earlier. Like, while the light's still getting better is when you stop, because it's, you have no exposure anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't think you have an interesting take on these things.
It's not the normal approach.
Well, it's not, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's not the normal approach, but you're also thinking about things creatively, visually, and practically too. Like, you're thinking about your scheduling, you're thinking about, not to say other DPs aren't, but it seems like it's a major part of your thought process when you're making decisions about what equipment to purchase, is things like that, like making sure you have as much of the lens usable as possible so that you can work in these situations. I think that's kind of unique. I'm curious now. When we had mentioned that the innovation's not necessarily in cameras right at this moment, but where we are seeing innovation, I think, and curious if you agree, is in lighting. I feel like that switch to LED lighting has opened up so many doors. And just the fact that people are like, we just had the DP for White Lotus a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about how they were filming in the hotel, and it was a real hotel, as everybody knows, but they tapped an iPad into the actual hotel's lighting, and they were manipulating and using the fixtures that were there. Like, they obviously did light in addition to it, but this idea of being able to kind of control all your lights, have LED panels, like, this has really changed the game. Curious what you think. I mean, you seem to embrace new technologies and like the benefits of them. So what are your thoughts on kind of this new evolution of lighting?
No, absolutely. We've completely changed over. I mean, the ability to, match colors and know what you want, so, we can have, whether it's that we have a special fire color that we just like to use, whether it's we shot on location and we took a spectrometry reading of the color and now we're matching that color on stage, or, even like right now I'm being lit by this window light, and there, this isn't the color of an HMI or something. It's, it's a gray day that's already probably a slightly greenish color that's not on the, not on the neutral scale. And then there's like, green lawn bouncing and a red roof. There's this complex color. It's not just whatever color a certain light is plus a gel. So, the fact that we can meter this window and then make the light, if we want a fill light that's looks like it's continuing the window wrap, we don't want it to look like another artificial source. We can make it exactly the same color, and so obviously or if we don't want it to be the same color, if we want it to look like the window is cool and there's a desk lamp that's glowing warm, we can make it exactly the amount warm that we want specifically for that window light, as opposed to some, generic window light color. So, I mean, we use this for everything all the time, and, matching whatever light, if there's a built-in light that we can't change, matching that, we can match other lights to that and then change the camera white balance, and make that neutral, so we use it for all kinds of things like that. And I think the thing that we've been doing that I think is kind of unique is and last time I was on, we talked about sort of the early prototype of some of this that we were using on Knives Out, and now it's still kind of prototypey, and we're working on it, but we advanced it a lot on Glass Onion, which is, I have my own sort of color calculator that I developed where we can take lights that are basically we can make dumb lights into smart lights. So when we have, when you have a movie light like a Sky Panel or a Vortex or Asteras or any of these brands, I mean, that's what I'm calling a smart light, and that they have that, they've calibrated the light to chromaticity coordinates to where I can measure the color of this window, put that color into the light, and it's going to make that exact color. But if you have a dumb light, like just a cheap LED ribbon with one of the, the cheap controllers for it, that's
like what I've got back here.
Yeah, exactly. That's a dumb light. So all you can do with that light, or effectively all you can do is, if it had, let's say it has, they might have 3, 4, 5, or sometimes more illuminants. It usually has RGB and either one white or two whites. Like it might have RGBW, cool white, and warm white. So it's got 5 kinds of emitters. All you can do is turn the 5 up and down, but you don't know what color you're making, right? You can just blend them. So, basically I have a calculator I created this calculator that it tells you exactly what blend makes the color you want, and also the brightest, most spectrally smooth blend, because as soon as you have more than 3 illuminants, instead of RGB, as soon as it's RGBW or RGBWW, there's more than one blend that'll make the same color. So this thing, so we have this thing that gives you the exact right blend and also the brightest, smoothest spectral version of it. So we started using that on the original Knives Out, and now we've gone to, now we've advanced it to where instead of sort of having to type it into the calculator and then putting that into your light control stuff, we're starting to develop all our own light control stuff where it's doing it in the background. So we don't have to we don't have to actively do anything. It's doing it. So we just we basically put the color that we want into the light control software, and the dumb light is now behaving as though it's a smart light, and we don't have to do anything manually.
That's awesome. I love that. And one thing I'm noticing in Glass Onion is that you're playing a lot more with color, and a lot of that's in the set design, obviously, but you gave yourself some challenges. I mean, you have neon lights, you've got glass refracting everywhere, you've got big giant shag red carpets. Like you have big colorful sources and, areas where there would be some bounce. Plus you also have a ton of daylight. I mean, Knives Out, all the interiors are, there's not a lot of windows in those interiors. There are some, but you've got a lot of like the big heavy wood and everything. In this one, there's a lot of glass, there's a lot of air, there's a lot of exterior lights, and it's just bouncing all over the place. And I'd love to kind of hear your sort of just overall philosophies on the way you approached interiors and exteriors for Glass Onion.
Okay. Well, I think for interior, I mean, specifically, it's the Onion that's got all the faceted glass, because the atrium that we were in for so long, the glass is only on the side. It's open air in the middle, and the glass is only on the side, and there's the glass in front of the Mona Lisa. But the onion, the Glass Onion, obviously it's faceted glass, so it's not just, glass can always be a reflection problem, but when it's faceted, that means, it's faceted into a dome. That means something's going to be reflecting things you don't want or whatever. And basically what we talked about, the production designer Rick Heinrichs and I talked about in prep, really early in prep. It wasn't like a whole long figuring it out. We were kind of like, okay, this is the approach. Okay, break, and just did it. But we don't want this to, we don't want it to look like a 1940s movie where, there's flagrantly mullions with no glass in them. I mean, it's the movie's called Glass Onion. It's a big, it's a big metaphor in the plot and themes of the movie. And we wanted to feel the glass. We don't want it, we don't want it to just be, okay, there's supposed to be glass there, but don't think about it. And, really the only way that you see glass, the only difference between glass and an empty mullion with no glass in it is either the glass is dirty, which we don't want, so it's getting backlit and all that, or it reflections. And so we kind of went down the road of, instead of avoiding reflections like you usually would, let's embrace them. So it's, let's make sure there's always all these constellations of light in there to be reflected. Obviously for the night stuff, there's reflections in the day too, but it's obviously it's a much bigger deal at night. So Rick and his team, they made those chandeliers, the infinity cube, and then we made that. So there's that big art installation structure, the infinity, we call it the infinity cube in the middle there. And so we made a bunch of different like cutouts and things that would go on top of our lighting diffusers that were basically 2D versions of the infinity cube.
Huh.
So we could light people, and not only is it okay if what we're lighting them with is in the reflection, it's actually nice because you see the infinity cube again in the reflection. So so with the Glass Onion, it was really about embracing reflections and always seeing those kind of constellations of lights in the faceted glass. And then for the exteriors, for the day exteriors, it was, we did have to shoot, we had a tight schedule, and we were there in Greece to shoot those exteriors. So we didn't have any option like, well, this one scene, we'll just shoot it right at the perfect moment when the sun is low, so we had to shoot in a lot of high sun, and we were also there in the time of year when the sun is high. And so we, obviously high sun can be a cinematographer's enemy, but we decided to, let's lean into this and figure out what's the way to make it where we can lean into this, but the way we're going to lean into it is to make it feel like this inviting sun-drenched look rather than this just really harsh, blasting sun. And that was a combination of, as I mentioned earlier, we did sometimes use some lens filtration that reduces contrast without making it blurry. Only sometimes. It was kind of a shot to shot thing. It wasn't like an overall thing. We did that. We did a lot of bounce light. We actively didn't use big lights pointed at people unless we thought there was, you could really get away with it and it's not going to look artificial, because we again wanted to lean into this sun-drenched feel and didn't want to start veering into a like artificially lit look. The bounce light, the filters, we do a lot of iris pulls as the camera's moving, and then also there's just the final color grade, kind of taking a strong hand but not or being confident but not overbearing with it, to where we change things within reason and really lean into like evening out colors, even when obviously if one shot's overcast it's going to be bluer, but it's like you just make it the same warm color or whatever. We didn't have much of that, but that's just an example of the approach. Yeah.
Well, one of the scenes that I'm guessing was particularly challenging for you is when all the lights went out. And now you have nothing to work with but what appears to be the lighthouse circling light around your set. Can you talk to us about that scene and kind of what the challenges were and then how you overcame them?
Yeah. Well, figuring that out was so much fun. And it was a really big interdepartmental project in prep and into shoot to make the lighthouse rigs. But yeah, Ryan and I both love that really theatrical look, and I know that he wanted, he wanted this to be really evocative, like where the audience is really plunged into this, where the dark is actually dark, and then you're getting blasted out with the lighthouse. And we wanted really sharp shadows. We've got shots where you distinctly see shadows on the wall as people are skulking and running around, and and the other thing we wanted out of it is to really sense the progress of that light sweep across the frame. Because if we were going totally realistic, not only is the edge of the beam of a lighthouse a lot blurrier than that, but it's very large geographically. Its sweep isn't, it wouldn't, within the narrow view of the frame, its sweep would probably feel more like a fade, just a fade up and down. So we wanted to go for this theatricality more than realism of really sensing its sweep across.
It was giving almost like a spotlight or even like a flashlight type of a feel.
Yeah, absolutely. So the solution ended up being these drums that were engineered by our key grip that it was a big drum that was also a shroud, because so sorry, just to back up, a couple reasons that you can't just pan a light across the set. There's a bunch. One is you're not going to get that hard edge. One is that when it's pointed away, it's going to be hitting things and bouncing back into the set. So you need it to be shrouded, whether a light's spinning or whether what's in front of the light is spinning. It's going to have to be a shroud. There needs to be a shroud anyway. So part of the logic was, let's just make the shroud also the thing that spins. And the other reason that we don't want just to be panning lights is these there's incredible precise stuff that we needed out of these rigs, like the timing, the speed, everything. We wanted the speed of that wipe on, and that's the speed of that wipe across the frame, to be able to adjust that and to adjust it separately from the time between the wipe on and the wipe off. So there's not just speed, there's kind of two aspects of speed, the wipe speed and then the time between wipe on and wipe off.
Yeah.
And then also, we needed this to progress down over large distances. So sometimes there were 2 or even 3 of these lighthouse rigs that dovetail into one another to continue on and look like a single sweep, which if you had people panning lights, the lighting department would need more takes than the actors. We don't want the lighting department to take any takes. We want the actors to do their thing and the lighting to just work. So we ended up with these drums, which were, it's basically a cylinder with part of it open, and we can adjust the size of the aperture, and they were controlled by DMX motors. So we had really precise control over the starting position and speed. And then we could also use that to adjust when we had multiple rigs. We could use that to adjust the offset, both the spatial offset and the time offset between the multiple rigs, so that they would, we would adjust it until the multiple rigs all look like one sweep. And then we know it's going to work every time. Now you got it set up. Now every time you push the button, it's going to look like that. And that was also part of the same, our custom software that's also driving the LEDs was, we wrote the custom code to drive the motors.
You're right, because it's like there are so many instances where the audience would not believe it anymore. If in the edit too, it's like you have to think about the post, because you can't have a cut of something that's going on one side of the building and immediately follow it with something going on the other side of the building and have the continuation of the same light. Like you'll start getting disoriented. And I think that you guys did such a brilliant job of always making it feel like that was one consistently moving light that didn't change speed or size. It all just worked. And I was just amazed by how that all came together so well. I mean, just the planning. It's just such a, for a single light source, what a challenge that must have been.
well, I'm really glad it did feel continuous like that, because we also took a lot of liberties dramatically. It usually, like in fact, it usually goes clockwise, but there's a couple shots where it goes counterclockwise, just because dramatically we needed it to go the other way. But the other thing that was really fun with that whole scene was, and this is another example of that kind of all the prep being great to where we have all this stuff figured out, but not, like a map that's as big as the area that it maps is useless, right? I mean, like an outline needs to be shorter than the thing that it's outlining. So, there's certain things, you figure out everything that you need to figure out, and then you have then when you actually do sort of the performance that is the shooting the movie, you have all these sort of things you can do. So one was, of course, the lighthouses being this agile where we could do really complex stuff and then make it repeatable was one of those where once we did all the work and prep to make sure the lighthouses could do that. Then once we're actually shooting, we can do all kinds of, fun, like, hey, let's make that a little shorter, a little longer, and then it's no problem to do it. And another example of that where Ryan and I had talked generally about it, but the seasoning to taste didn't happen until we were shooting, was doing subjective things like after the light finishes sweeping, it's really dark. I mean, he wanted everything to be really like actually dark when it's dark, but it's after the light finishes sweeping, it's dark, but do a very slow, subtle dim up as though it's your eyes adjusting. So
I noticed that. I 100% noticed that when the lights went off for the first time. You noticed that.
Yeah.
It goes off, and then it just kind of like I wasn't necessarily thinking about it in terms of my eyes are adjusting, but I totally get that. That makes sense.
Yeah. The first time also Blanc gets the flashlight out, and that kind of changes the lighting also a little bit. But yeah, so we had all these sort of different tricks that we could do, but it wasn't completely all decided in prep. Like, okay, on this shot it's this one, on that shot it's that one. It would be more like I would say to Ryan, hey, is this one where I've got it going where, or I go, did you see that rehearsal? Like I just had it come up just a tiny bit after. Did you like that? Or things like that where we could basically it was all set up and prep enough that then it was easy to do that, and we could do that just really on the fly and make the season to taste changes like that.
I want to talk about your approach to lighting and probably filming as well. These large ensemble scenes. We actually have a question from what is that? Kartik Parmer on Instagram. I apologize if I'm not saying your name correctly, but thank you for the question. And it's, how do you approach lighting really big scenes with an ensemble cast, like the murder scene in the main foyer area, with the choking scene? I think that when I watch this film, and I think anybody that listens to this show is coming at it from a cinematographer, from a filmmaking point of view, I'm looking at it and I'm saying, there are so many lead characters. How do you not, like, I feel like the natural instinct would be a bunch of coverage with singles, but then it's disorienting. You don't know what's going on. It also takes forever. So,
and it's not interesting.
And then it's not interesting. And then you think to yourself, okay, well then maybe a big oneer and really block it and have people, and you guys didn't do that either. I feel like you found like the perfect approach for filming ensemble casts of this size. And I'd love to just get your strategies and thoughts about how you did that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's to a large extent it's Ryan, but it's kind of an approach that he and I have talked about for a long time, and specifically, and it kind of applies to everything, but there's a specific implementation of it for this ensemble cast stuff, and it really is that just really getting interesting, confident blocking, and then that sense of every shot tells the story, and specifically with the ensemble cast, you want to be seeing people. Like, it doesn't feel like this big fun ensemble cast, movie if what you're doing is you keep cutting to shots that only have one person in them. It's about arranging people in space and seeing all of them and how they and how they all relate to each other, and then so Ryan will get a great blocking, and then specifically with some of these performance scenes, some of them, not all, but some of them, Ryan is super planned out in general. Some of those are a little more figured out as we're shooting than his other stuff, where he knows exactly whatever. He might not know the details of the shots, but he knows exactly the concept of every shot. Sometimes the long dialogue scenes like this are a little more letting the actors block it, get a great, really interesting blocking, and then figuring it out as we go. Or not as we go, but figuring it out after the blocking, and then saying, okay, here's the shots we're going to do. And in that case, it really is about how do you really get the sense of all these people in space where that is shots of people together and evolving shots and stacked shots with people in the foreground and people in the background. And then the other thing is stage line. That's one of the biggest things, because you can also, when you have a lot of people, you can get into this quagmire where you've got a script supervisor, so not our script supervisor, but I've seen this before. You got a script supervisor saying, you have to shoot every person from every other person's eye line. You're like, what are you talking about? We don't have 7 weeks to shoot this, 1-page scene. So understanding eye line, but not getting trapped in sort of the simplistic film school version of it, and really using it, using eyeline instead of being, manipulated by eyeline to say, hey, we can actually, make this stronger. Like if you think of what is the strongest connection in this scene, like in the scene that we call the disruptor scene, which is the scene when Miles explains disruption to Blanc, and then Janelle comes in and gives her speech about what's really going on.
Yeah.
But in that scene, first you have a strong, you have one clear, strong eye line between Miles and Blanc, and then it's between Miles and Andy. And if you hinge everything on that, you don't need as many shots, and B, the scene has that strength because everything is hinged on this. And and it's okay if individual shots break their own eye line, even as long as they don't break the big eye line. Like if somebody throws a look to someone else, it's okay if their thrown look is the wrong direction for that look itself, but the camera's in the right place for the big stage line.
That makes sense. So you're focusing on what the primary point of the scene is and making sure that's all proper with the eye lines, and everything else can be, for lack of a better term, kind of insert shots that are a little bit, you don't need to be as strict about it.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say it as though they're throwaway. It's more like they're made stronger by the fact that where the camera is for those shots is right for the big point of the scene. And then when they do, like if you have one of the other characters that's not one of the two people in that strongest eye line, they're looking the correct direction for the big eye line, for that big confrontation. They're looking the right way. And then if they throw a glance, it's okay. It's not only okay if that glance is technically the wrong eye line for that other person. In a way, it's almost good because it's saying that's still not the thing you need to be paying attention to right now.
All right, now I'm understanding it. So you're approaching all the shots from the perspective of the one main eye line for the the primary point of that scene.
What's the axis of the scene, not what's the axis of this one person's glance this one time, and that kind of, and look, you still sometimes need to get another shot at another eye line if you're worried that something's genuinely confusing. But if it's not genuinely confusing, if it's just you don't have to do it just because it's a rule, just because there's this eye line rule, you can just say, so that just allows it to be stronger and to concentrate on the stuff that makes the shots interesting instead of becoming a slave to this eye line thing and having to put the camera, let's get every character from every other character's angle.
Plus it's a whodunit, it's a mystery movie, so people are going to be paying closer attention than they would if it was just, a rom-com or something. Like they're focusing, they need to know, it's crucially important, who is in the room, what's going on, what are they holding, what are they doing? And you have to kind of push some hints along the way. Like you just kind of have to do that. And I know we're technically out of time. Do you have like 5 more minutes to answer one more question?
Yeah.
All right. Because I wanted to make sure that we discussed camera motion for Glass Onion, because I think you guys do such a great job. It's purposeful. Sometimes it's aggressive, but it feels right in the scene all the time. And I think you use it not only just as a tool of good filmmaking, but you also use it as a way to really make sure people see something that they're going to need to recall later in the film. So I'd love to just hear from you as our last question for this conversation, your approach to camera motion in this film and why particularly, and maybe there are certain things you're doing because it's a mystery that you may not otherwise do in another film.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I mean, as Ryan says, every shot tells a story. So, I mean, it's really about getting the story across and doing it in the most visually impactful way possible. So although we love camera movement and fun dolly shots and all that, it's never for its own sake. The camera doesn't move when it shouldn't, it moves when it should. And when it's, and stopping means something too. It's not just it moves, it's that it moves and then it stops, and getting those solid stops is itself, a big thing too. We try to avoid Steadicam unless we have to, partially because of that. It looks great when you're pushing in and then it stops and it starts swaying and it doesn't have that strength. We like the strong push in, but like the strong stop also. So it's really about designing these things where it's just about the moment and the and sometimes it could be, the overall idea of the dolly move, the big idea of it is a big story point, but the sort of the nuances could even just have to do with the actor's posture or how they're leaning or moving or something. And yeah, so when you kind of get into the nuances of it as opposed to the overall, it really is that sort of like taste, just your taste and feeling it in the moment. I mean, there's like a lot of times where you might do a slow dolly move, you might do a fast dolly move, but even which version of slow changes it. You're like, if you do it like this, it feels like something's dawning on somebody, where if you go a little bit faster, it just feels like you're reframing, even though they're both slow and it's barely a difference. So, and again, a lot of that can have to do with the pace of the scene, the posture of the actor, all of this stuff. So there's a lot of, so there isn't like a rule about it. You have to look at it and see what it looks like. I mean, there's a lot of times where we've already dialed it in, like we've already adjusted the speed of the dolly from this to that, and we've already dialed it in. And then I might say to Ryan, like, do you think we should go just a hair slower? And he's like, yeah, I was going to say that to you, and so it's like, on the one hand, we both sense that, but I don't know what there's not like a rule book about it. You have to, sense it for the exact, again, the shot and scene and everything.
I'm glad you brought up your appreciation for that clean stop on the move. I've read a couple articles where you mentioned that, and it wasn't something that you necessarily think about right off the bat, but it is such an important thing to have a good stop to it. Work with a dolly grip that doesn't know what they're doing, and you'll learn right away that you need a clean stop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, how's that for a clean stop? I've taken enough of your time, and I really appreciate it. The film is so good. It's on Netflix. You guys, of course, can check it out if you haven't already. Watch it twice so you can see it, enjoy it, and then go back in and see all the little details that you didn't pick up the first time.
There's a lot of details you don't get the first time.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait to see it my second time. I saw Knives Out twice, and it just, once you see it the second time, it really changes everything. You kind of realize how stupid you are that you didn't notice it the first time. But the film is awesome. I really enjoy speaking with you, Steve. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, I want to thank Steve Yedlin, ASC, the DP of Glass Onion. Thank you so much for coming back on the show, Steve. We love talking to you. Of course, I want to thank our producer, Connor Crosby, for putting this whole thing together. You can find him at ignitionvisuals.com. Of course, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where you can not only hear the episode, but see the episode. All things Go Creative Show at gocreativeshow.com. And if you want to follow me and all my shenanigans with my production company and my band, 3 Second Chances, it's all there at Ben Consoli on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you guys for joining us today, and we will see you next time on the next episode. I don't like saying it that way. Too many nexts. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you on the next episode of Go Creative Show, a podcast for filmmakers. Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for the coffee.